So, which is your favorite monster? Monster? I just like umbrellas. Is that why you're called Pumbrelia? No, idiot, my parents named me that as a baby. Nominative determinism? Well, I did also pop into existence with one of those tiny umbrellas. Like the ones people put in drinks? Yeah. You're an odd person. Who are you to talk? Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, we've done all kinds of Monster Hunter-based lists on this channel in the past, but one thing that we haven't done in this kind of format is cover the monsters from Frontier. Over the last few months, Josh and I have steadily been going through the entire catalog of monsters within the game, and I think I'm finally prepared to undergo the titanic task of presenting you with a tier list of every monster unique to Frontier. I won't be doing subspecies or alternate versions of monsters in general, aside from specifically the origin species, which are massive wild changes, and also burst species, which are practically different monsters entirely. I also won't be covering monsters that are in the main series for the most part, just because they're already in the main series. Zenith monsters are also notably significant changes, but at some point I'll be doing a Zenith exclusive tier list, so I'll be saving them for that rather than cramming them all in here. Even still, grab a drink and settle in, because we have a significant number of monsters to go over today. One thing before I start, I actually really like pretty much every new monster that's introduced within Frontier. Now that I've gone back and actually looked at the full list with the experiences and memories of having fought them all, there isn't really a single one that I think is a straight up bad monster, just varying degrees of good. So keep that in mind, that even my lowest tier isn't intended as an insult, merely my way of personally comparing every single monster that there is. Without further ado then, let's begin on the D tier with Abiarugu. Some people will probably disagree with me on this one, but with the context of having fought a Glavenus first, personally this monster was pretty underwhelming. However, it's also important to know that this monster came way before Glavenus did, and thus was the first monster in the series to have a sword for a tail. The fight isn't bad by any means, but it doesn't have any crazy memorable moments either, like some of the later ones that we will have come up on this list. In combat, it sort of just feels like a toned down Devil Joe with fire breath and a sword tail. Next up we have Nono and Camu Arugaron. I'm doing these two monsters in one entry because they are more or less identical. The main uniqueness is in the visuals, where they are slightly different, but their movesets are pretty much the same. One is the male of the species and the other the female, and while I do consider them to be quite tame, essentially just ice wolves, their existence is important for creating possibly my favorite monster in the whole game, so I wouldn't have it any different way. After that we move on to the C tier, which starts off with Guanzarumu. Sorry if I mispronounce these names, there is a lot of names in a language that I don't know and I might struggle. This is a water-based flying wyvern that doesn't really spend much time in the air. It fires out balls and beams and can also release a paralysis in a cloud around it. It's not bad, but again, like the others, I think it just sort of pales in comparison to what Frontier monster designs do have to offer. Then we have Laviente, or Raviente, however you choose to pronounce it, and this one is very torn for me. As a creature, visually and conceptually, it's really goddamn cool. Literally the largest monster in the entire series, and it's a cross between an eastern dragon and a snake. Actually being in an arena with this thing is just imposing as hell, but as far as the actual fight, it's just sort of not much of a fight. This is the definition of spectacle without substance as far as I'm concerned, as when you are actually fighting it, you're just sort of chunking through a health pool while dodging the odd attack every 20 to 30 seconds. You have to go through this a load of times. It looks awesome the entire time, but it is missing a whole load of the actual hunting feeling that you get from a quest, at least for me.
He's no monster, Gaston.
Following him is Eruzerion. Some people may disagree, but I just don't really like this monster much. I can see what they were going for, and aesthetically, if we ignore the context of Monster Hunter, it's cool, but it just really doesn't look like a Monster Hunter creature to me. It looks like it's from another game, and the fight is just sort of annoying. It's full of massive AoE attacks, and I just don't think it was that fun to go against. Next up then we have Jiarugu. This is technically its own unique monster, but realistically it might as well be a subspecies of Abiarugu. It's just another sword tail brute wyvern, but with ice element instead of fire. It does have its cool moments like covering its tail in ice, and because of this I think it's just a touch better than the original counterpart. Then finally in the C tier we have Kuravishimu, a leviathan that looks a hell of a lot like a Piscine wyvern. This creature uses fire and thunder, as well as having crystals throughout its body that it uses in a unique way. I'm not really a fan of how it looks like at all. It sort of gives me the heebie-jeebies, but the fight itself is at least quite creative in that it reacts to the weather around the monster. In sunlight it can do flash attacks to stun you, and the crystals it puts in the ground will just instantly stun you if you are near them when they explode. In a rainstorm the crystals will instead attract lightning and do thunder damage. It's pretty neat, really. Moving on up to the B tier then, we start with Ruko Diora. This is where we get two monsters that I really do genuinely enjoy. This monster pretty much introduces magnetism properly to Frontier when you first fight him. He can give you a debuff and then push and pull you around a bit. It is fun and unique at the time, and I like the design of it aesthetically as well. Then we have Garuba Deora. This is the burst species of Kushala, and it is actually really neat. It is a relatively unique fight that starts to introduce some of the crazier mechanics within Frontier, something that normal Monster Hunter games had not even remotely touched up to that point, but have sort of dipped into in more recent entries. The big moment of this fight, the one that I will always remember no matter what, is his guaranteed one-shot. He stands there and starts shining all brightly, and a little dome appears right next to him. If you aren't in the dome when the attack goes off, you die. Simple as that. It looks great, it's fun to fight around, and it makes you think a little bit harder in those moments. Next then is Toa Tesukatora, the origin species of Teostra. I really like the concept of the origin species in general, ancient extra powerful versions of the monsters that we know today, and this one is a good way to start showing it off for this list. This completely flips the concept of Teostra on its head, turning it into an ice dragon, and oh, what a ridiculous control of ice it has. It applies Frostbite, which is essentially just Ice Blight that also removes the effect of hot drinks. It can freeze you on the spot, and it makes crazy ice projectiles too. After that, we have Kyo Arubaru. This monster looks absolutely insane, and not in a necessarily bad way either. It's almost like it's made of ashen tree bark, and it's quite simply a massive fire-based elder dragon. It has tons of physical attacks, including even just jumping up and down with its massive body, and it can infuse a lot of its physical attacks with fire as well, and also release the fire in a full-on beam. It's just a really cool monster. Then we have Diuragawa, the asparagus wyvern.
Asparagus?
That's not his official title, of course, but his tail looks like asparagus, and I love it, and I can't view him in any other way. His shape is very Tigrex-like, and in combat he is heavily based around Ice Element, but can also apply sleep with his tail. I like sleep monsters, and while I don't think he is a particularly complex creature, I definitely have a bit of a fondness for him. After that is Hyuji Kiki, and this monster just tears me up in multiple ways. Design-wise, I think he is pretty great, and in theory his fight is incredible too. A monster that can apply 3 whole statuses, and he can do them pretty much simultaneously. It is terrifying as a prospect, and controlling your hunter in this fight is just really hard. The monster shoots spikes out everywhere, including in large piles into the ground, and if you walk into those spikes or get hit by them while they're mid-air, you just get infused with every debuff that he has access to, which will destroy you. I find this fight annoying whenever I'm against him, and yet I think he's a fun monster, so right around the middle feels pretty right to me. Next up we have Unknown, the monster with no true name. Visually this creature is neat, but let's be honest, it's just Rathian and Rathalos fused together into one monster and then changed to be black and red. The moves are stronger, and it has more interesting ways to use both fire and poison, but I don't generally consider it to be that cool aside from one mechanic, the fact that it just gets faster and stronger and just generally deadlier as you kill it more. Every few percentage points of health, it gets more dangerous, and that is fun in itself. After that, we have Rebi Deora, which, while significantly similar to Ruka Deora, is its own unique monster, so it gets its own slot. And while they are on the same tier, I do think I like this one a bit less. Yes, it is basically the same thing, but with a lot more going on, including having the magnetism active all the time. It just has a lot more AoE that doesn't really feel necessary to me, and some more punishing moves in general that almost feel like they're there just for the sake of it. I don't dislike this monster at all, I just like Ruka Deora more. Following that, we have Zeru Ryusu, the burst species of Rathalos, and this one is pretty cool. It is visually quite pretty despite being based on just a regular Rathalos, and it has a lot of light-based shenanigans going on as well, including a nearly guaranteed one-shot move it will do the second you enter the area. It is visually spectacular, but I find attacks like that pretty annoying, which is the only real thing keeping this monster from being even higher up on the list. Then we have Barukyorosu, which is the first of the monsters with this unique shape, basically a flying wyvern but a bit more sleek and streamlined, with essentially whips coming off of the wing finger on each side. This shape leads to some fun attacks that I actually enjoy quite a decent amount, but there is another monster of this shape that I just think is way cooler than this. A good monster for sure, but just not my favorite of its type. After that, we have Gesura Bazura, the poison brute wyvern. I don't really like the way that he looks. It is definitely unique and conceptually interesting, but I just find him a little bit ugly, for lack of a better word, which feels mean to say, but it is what it is, and it's just my personal rankings. The thing about this monster that really pushes it up for me, though, is that it can make little pitfall traps for you to fall into, and it can even infuse them with poison. It's irritating to fall into one in combat, but conceptually for a monster attack, I just absolutely adore that it can do that in general.
Get out of the ball pit!
And then we move up to the A tier, which is for monsters that I think are very good all around, really just not quite the perfect ones, but enjoyable experiences and designs that I like as well. That said, we aren't even halfway through the list of monsters yet, so the majority are at this point or above. Starting off the A tier then, we have Boga Batarumu. This is essentially a sandy version of a Cantor and Eucanlos, a third member of this trio. It looks like a badass battle tortoise and it fires sand out of its cannon-like holes, which is just really cool. It is massive, but it is a massive monster that you can fight pretty normally, not like a siege fight or anything like that, and I just really enjoy his experience and the experience of going against it. Next up is Shantien. This monster is definitely one of the core experiences of Frontier, a really cool flying Leviathan-shaped Elder Dragon. It uses a unique element that is a combination of fire, thunder, and water, and it actually has a multi-phased fight as well, starting off a lot like a siege fight that you can take on from an airship before it eventually destroys the airship and lands down in a volcano area and changes colors, changing up its moveset entirely and becoming notably more threatening. I love the concept and I think the design of the monster is great. It just sort of exemplifies what this tier is for me. Good visually, good fight concept, and good execution. The higher tiers are pretty much just exclusively for my personal bias towards certain creatures. Following that is Inagami. I really like Inagami as a creature. It is a special Elder Dragon as far as I'm concerned, having its entire own map that is just a beautiful bamboo forest. It also uses the bamboo for itself like a regenerative armor coating on broken parts. It can summon trees out from under the ground, and it can even put you to sleep, and you know how much I like sleep monsters. It's just a super underutilized status that when used right can really add tension to the fight while also being countered by an item, so it doesn't really feel oppressive. After that is Espinas, the flagship of Frontier as a whole. This is a lovely monster, well designed and beautiful in all aspects, and the fight is pretty fun too, even though it can apply multiple annoying debuffs at the same time. I really like the fact that it starts asleep and you have to just slowly beat it up until it accepts that you're actually a threat, wake up and start fighting you. It's just a fun monster as a whole. Then comes Pariah. This monster is gross, but purposefully so, and I appreciate it for that reason. It can inflict the soiled status, which isn't done by many monsters, but I also appreciate that because it sucks to be unable to use items. It has a spit attack that will guaranteed stun you if it hits you, and it will occasionally just puke at you, straight up projectile vomit as a projectile weapon. It isn't for everyone, for sure, but the design here is definitely consistent and well thought through. Then we have Mariganasu, the bird species of Espinas, and this thing is just sort of insane. It lives in a cave, it is blind, its horn is essentially a power drill, it has a unique element, and its tail is a massive blunt weapon. Being blind, it actually has a unique mechanic as well where it responds to a hunter making sound, but this is mostly just represented in game by it simply attacking the hunter who's doing the most damage to it. It doesn't really attack other hunters once it's picked a target, though it does reset its target occasionally. This makes a really fun and unique hunt in multiplayer where you essentially just trade aggro from the monster and only one person has to hard focus on dodging everything. I quite enjoy the concept.
He still wants to kill me!
Next up we have Guanzarumu, the origin species of Gravios, and this has been completely reworked to be a water monster with many parts of its body just being changed into little spouts to fire out bits of water. This monster is like a walk-in water park covered in moss, and I actually really love the design. The fight is fun too, and they can even jet forwards using water coming out of their tail like a thruster. It's silly, but the good kind of silly, and I like that kind of silly, and I like this monster. Following that is Vol'jang, the origin species of Rajang, and if you thought Rajang was meant to be mean to hunters, this guy takes it to a whole other level, firing out beams of fire and even willing to set itself on fire to make its physical attacks also have an element of fire to them. The moveset is solid, but this one is in the position that it is because visually it's just absolutely badass. A very deserving alternate version for Rajang. After that we have Torrid Glass, which is just a really fun, properly bird-shaped flying wyvern, properly feathered. It absorbs sunlight and uses it to funnel thunder element into its attacks and even do flashbangs on occasion. This is one of those monsters in Frontier that doesn't feel overdesigned at all, just a really wonderful creature all around. Then comes Miro, and while at the base this monster isn't particularly impressive, what I really like about it is the fact that it has multiple forms that it changes between throughout the fight, almost like it's imitating the concept of a werewolf or even just a general shapeshifter. It has a mode where it swells up its legs and goes full physical, a mode where it makes itself a lot smaller, at least as far as the crystals go, and it goes super speedy. It has a mode where the crystals grow out and it just starts using them a lot more in combat. It's almost like multiple different types of monster in one, changing its fighting style multiple times throughout the encounter. It's just a really cool concept. Then rounding out this tier we have Guanzarumu. This monster is one that I know that other people like quite a bit, but for me he is just off of the list where I think think monsters start to get incredible. He is a really fun fight, don't get me wrong, and by far his most notable mechanic is that he just controls a legion of winged drakes, commanding his army to do ridiculous things like pick up hunters and just throw them off the map. It is fun and unique, no doubt about it, just not one of my personal favorite fights. Then moving on up to the S tier, we started off with Rey and Lolo Gugarf. I absolutely love these both as a concept and in execution. These monsters are two sides of the same magnetic coin. One is red, one is blue, and they fight as a tag team, with moves that are almost like they are wrestling against you, taking advantage of magnetic mechanics to push and attract both the hunters and each other, as occasionally they actually do a move together within tandem. It is a great concept and a great fight, and I have a really personal soft spot for these monsters too. Next up is Boga Batarumu, who looks pretty silly, let's be honest. He's just a giant alligator-like monster with little fire-shaped plates coming out of his body, but I actually like the way that he looks with his little floppy face. In combat, he is a super interesting blast monster, shooting out gas that can explode, but also having parts of his body explode at times, with different colors to represent when the body parts are about to shoot out gas. It's a bit weird to describe, but put simply, this is just one of the fights that I had the most fun doing. It's just a super enjoyable experience in its own unique way. Following him is Haruto Merugu, who is essentially a living ball of mercury. He has full control of a strange liquid metal that he can use to armor himself, to grow out different parts of his body to use offensively, or even just shoot out at the hunters if he wants to as well. The hilarious attack that this one has that makes me really like it though, is one where it just surrounds itself in this and basically turns into a ball and just flings itself in circles around the hunter until it hits something like a pinball.
I'm gonna be doing this. If you get hit, it's your own fault.
After that, we have Barlagul, who is quite the fun and unique Leviathan. Its overall moveset isn't really crazy outside of a couple of things. One is that its tongue is sticky, and it can use it for essentially a ranged pin, where it just sucks things out of people. When it does this, it will actually drain the blood of whatever it grabs, and then changes to be able to use elemental attacks of that type for a short period after. It can get poison if it uses it on an eye of prey, paralysis from a gen prey, or even blood from hunters, which makes its attacks actually drain sharpness from your weapons, which is just an interesting take on a blood debuff. Then comes Diesu Roa, a big old elder dragon that is essentially a god of ice. It uses the frozen seraphim elephant, which is just essentially a combination of dragon, ice, and fire, and it can use each of these in different moments throughout the fight as well. It can make pillars of ice, it can shoot dragon beams, and it can even make those dragon beams bounce off of the ice pillars. It's very cool and extremely deadly, almost undoubtedly one of the most powerful monsters in the game. Next up is Duri Madira, one of the most infamous monsters from the game. This monster is only fightable in a unique arena where you can't even bring your own items. You have to buy your items beforehand from a preset points limit, and when you fight it, even the feint system is different, where you have the opportunity to revive downed hunters, because this fight is just that damn difficult. It uses both deadly poison and also ice, as well as combining the two on occasion to make poisonous ice. It can shoot out a beam of ice shards that functions almost like a Gatling gun. Each one is just a tiny shard that basically destroys you on its own. Everything this monster does is insane. It is so difficult, but it is also quite cool, hence why it made it this far up the list. Then we have a Kuravishimu, the Crystal Scorpion. I love the concept of a giant scorpion monster, and I hope that the main series will one day make one of these. But this guy is just really neat. This design is a good portion of why I have this affection for him, but the fight itself is pretty cool too, nonetheless. It can crystallize hunters, full on stopping them on the spot and draining all of their stamina, and its fight changes up as you break different parts off of it, making it a really fun fight in general. It also has the ability to heal each of its parts and thus change states on its own, which is a neat concept to have too. Following that is his counterpart, Sakura Jebia. Again, technically a different monster, but very similar. It is smaller and thus faster, and it is much more of a ranged fighter than physical, using its crystals more as projectiles than anything else. I definitely personally prefer a Kuravishimu, but this one is pretty great too. After that is Furukururu, another extremely bird-like flying wyvern. This thing has a really long beak, and it is covered in absolutely beautiful feathers. While its general moveset is neat, it doesn't really break the mold until it starts to full-on suck nectar out of plants in different zones to just give it access to the majority of the statuses in the game one at a time. Everything from poison to sleep to soiled. As a result, every fight against it is different depending on what zones it chooses to go to. It's just a beautiful monster that has such variance that but it makes me really enjoy the whole experience.
Yeah, I love plants.
And then finally for the S tier we have Zenna Sarisu, one of those flying wyverns with whips, and this one looks edgy as hell. Dark, almost metallic scales with a red glow underneath, but the actual fight that it has is just exhilarating. It fights in the Painted Waterfalls map, and it uses water as its elements, where on occasion it will just straight up create rainbows in the sky with its attacks, which is beautiful. They can even make geysers pop out of the ground. It's just a wonderful fight all around, and not at all what you might expect from looking at this edgy-ass creature. Moving on then to the S+ tier, this is the things that I just consider to be in contention for my favorite monster in all of Frontier, and we'll start off with Midgoron. This is an upgraded version of the Arugoron monsters that I put all the way in the bottom tier of this list, and the theory behind it is what happens to the male of the species when it loses its mate. It becomes this evil hell wolf bent on revenge over time, and well, the result of that is incredible. The fight is super hard, it shoots fireballs out at massive speed that do incredible damage in a reasonably large area of effect as well, and of course the coolest part of it is that it can practically teleport. It mixes this in with a bunch of its moves and with the fireballs. It sounds crazy, but it makes for a really fun and engaging fight that I never get tired of. Then comes Yama Karai, the original species of Yamazukami. Origin species, I don't know why I pronounced it that way. I love the regular version of this monster as a concept, but just a giant roaming balloon octopus that feeds on soil and sucks up entire ecosystems by accident just because it wants the soil underneath. But Yama Karai fixes the one real weak point of Tsukami, the fight. It gives you the ability to fight it properly on an actual map. It augments the experience massively too, giving it the ability to apply poison, paralysis, sleep. It can even dip its tentacles into the ground and pick up massive chunks of rock while you are standing on them. It can make trees rapidly grow around the area, and of course it will even try to suck you into its massive imposing mouth. It's just an incredibly well done variation to what was already one of my favorite monsters conceptually. Then we have Zamuza. This crab starts off absolutely covered in earth, using it like a set of armor and then just bashing around at you with its claws. And of course it has a fun and unique mechanic where you slowly chip away at its armor, breaking all of its parts off, and eventually if you do it right you can even free the crab underneath. A small and nimble little guy with two stabby pincers that it uses to control electricity. It is both an incredible design and execution with a fun fight on top of it the whole way through. Next up is Pokharadon. Yes, I know this is an incredibly early game monster, I get that, and I know most people don't even consider early game low threat creatures to be among the best of anything, but I love Pokharadon. It's just a big mix between a walrus and a seal. It has a move where it claps loud enough to stun hunters that are nearby, and it immediately follows this up with a jump, and they can even make small pitfall traps in the ground with their tusks. It's just a really fun fight, really fun design, especially for a monster considered to be that low of a threat level. Following that comes Pobarubarumu, this giant hunting horn whale monster, and I just absolutely love this creature. Upon looking at it the first time, I just thought it was funny. I had low expectations, but the fight is just absolutely wonderful. Upon further inspection, you can see the resemblance to a whale, but with legs, and its tail is essentially just a full-on instrument. Along with that, it will sing, and it will make buffs like a hunting horn in a radius around it. These buffs affect the monster itself, of course, that's why it does it, but they also affect the hunter, and so occasionally it will give you like an attack buff, while also hitting harder itself. It's just really interesting and unique as a concept that also comes with a fun and unique fight, making you think about some different things than you normally would. After that is Rex, the lightning Tigrex, and this monster is just almost here pretty much just because it's absolutely oozing cool. It is basically a Tigrex in a suit of power armor, magnetically attaching ore to its body like a suit of armor, and not only are its attacks powered by thunder in general, but it can also use this magnetism to pull rocks up mid-air and jump off of them. It's just totally badass. The fight is fun, and it makes me like Tigrex way more than I have with any other version of him. Moving on then, we have Varusa Barosu, the origin species of Diablos. This one is just fun as hell. It looks badass, like an absolutely demonic Diablos, and then it asks you to essentially play nuclear keep away, totally throwing the concept of a regular hunt on its head. Every few minutes, a glowing cactus will spawn in the middle of the area, and if the monster eats it, it will power up into a super mode that makes it way faster and deadlier. You can still fight it like that, you can still kill it like that, but the cactus comes with a unique mechanic as well. As a hunter, you can pick it up and run around like you're holding an egg, and while you do so, the monster will chase you relentlessly, and it also drains your health constantly. So between multiple hunters, you are essentially just passing it back and forth, playing a game of keep the cactus away from the monster until it despawns, and then you can fight it normally for a bit. It's just a really cool looking monster with an incredibly fun, unique mechanic. Then comes Feronoku, Another one of those bird-like flying wyverns. This one is somewhat hard to explain why I like it so much, but the actual feeling of fighting it is just really enjoyable. It uses thunder element, but almost exclusively this is represented as a sort of static electricity, and it basically just dances around the place as it attacks you, jumping and shooting out little bits of electricity as it lands. It's just a super funky monster with a weird fight with weird timings, and I just find it hilarious in the best of ways. Following that is a Noropatissu, a giant shark-like flying wyvern with a saw blade coming out of its face for a horn, like a swordfish. It is just incredibly inherently cool to me. This design is just incredible the whole way through, and while it mostly uses ice as its element, when you injure it enough it will start to use dragon as well, almost like it unlocks it within anger. I really loved this creature the whole way through. And then finally, capping off our tier list is Gogomo, the spider monkey parental figure. This is another one of those lower threat level monsters that I just adore, that some people might question. But I just love the design of it in general, as well as the fact that its concept is essentially a pun. It's a big ape based off of a spider monkey, but they also make it like it's a spider monkey. It has webs that it shoots out, and it can use these to swing from trees. It even fights with a baby version of itself on its back just for fun. It can even just hang from trees once in a while, with you needing to just manually whack the tree with your weapon to knock it down, which is such a fun little unique mechanic. They can even throw plants at you to apply different statuses. I adore this monster as a whole. And that just about does it. A whole load of monsters ranked within tiers against each other, every unique monster to Frontier, excluding their secondary variations. This has been one hell of a journey, and I hope you enjoyed finding my thoughts on each and every one of these creatures. Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.